Few writers in history have captured the complexities of the human soul as profoundly as Fyodor Dostoevsky. His works explore the depths of morality, free will, suffering, and redemption, making him one of the most influential literary figures of all time. Through his novels, he dissected the human condition, exposing its contradictions, struggles, and the eternal battle between good and evil. Dostoevsky's unique ability to merge philosophical inquiry with deep psychological insight has solidified his reputation as one of the greatest novelists in world literature. His works continue to resonate across generations, shaping modern thought on existentialism, psychology, and ethics. Born in the 19th century, Dostoevsky's life was marked by tragedy, hardship, and profound personal transformation. He experienced both great literary success and devastating personal failures, including exile, imprisonment, financial ruin, and near execution. These experiences were not merely biographical details, but crucial elements that shaped his worldview in writing. His ability to draw from personal suffering gave his works an authenticity that few writers could match. The struggles of his characters, ranging from the tormented Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment to the deeply philosophical Ivan Karamazov in The Brothers Karamazov, reflect Dostoevsky's own spiritual and intellectual dilemmas. Dostoevsky's contributions to literature extend far beyond storytelling. His works contain deep philosophical inquiries into the nature of faith, reason, and morality. His exploration of free will and determinism, particularly in Notes from Underground, has been regarded as a precursor to existentialist thought. Philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus engaged with his ideas, often citing him as a key influence in the development of existentialism and modern philosophy. His psychological depth also laid the foundation for the emerging field of psychoanalysis, influencing thinkers like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Despite the depth and complexity of his themes, Dostoevsky's novels remain deeply human. His characters are not abstract philosophical symbols, but living, breathing individuals with desires, fears, and contradictions. His ability to depict the inner turmoil of his characters allows readers to see themselves in his works, making his novels as relevant today as they were in the 19th century. Whether exploring the guilt and redemption of Raskolnikov or the faith and skepticism of the Karamazov brothers, Dostoevsky forces readers to confront profound existential questions that remain pertinent in the modern world. This dissertation will explore the life and literary legacy of Fyodor Dostoevsky, tracing his journey from his early years to his lasting influence on literature and philosophy. Each chapter will delve into different aspects of his life, from his childhood and first literary endeavors to his imprisonment, exile, and ultimate transformation into one of the greatest writers of all time. By examining his major works, philosophical inquiries, and personal struggles, this study aims to shed light on the enduring relevance of Dostoevsky's literature. The following chapters will begin with an exploration of Dostoevsky's early years, shedding light on the formative influences that shaped his intellect and artistic vision. From his upbringing in a deeply religious household to his education and exposure to literary and philosophical movements, these early experiences played a crucial role in his development as a writer. Understanding the environment in which Dostoevsky was raised provides valuable insight into the recurring themes of faith, suffering, and redemption in his works. Another key aspect of Dostoevsky's life was his political engagement, which ultimately led to his arrest and exile in Siberia. His time in a labor camp transformed his outlook on life and deepened his religious convictions. This period of suffering and isolation played a fundamental role in shaping the moral and spiritual dilemmas present in his later novels. His experience with political persecution also gave him a deep distrust of utopian ideologies, which he would later critique in Demons. Dostoevsky's return from exile marked the beginning of his most productive period as a writer. It was during this time that he penned his most famous works, grappling with questions of morality, faith, and human psychology. From his psychological torment in Crime and Punishment to the tragic idealism of Prince Mishkin in The Idiot, Dostoevsky continued to explore the complexities of the human spirit, blending fiction with profound philosophical inquiry. His final years saw the completion of his magnum opus, The Brothers Karamazov, a novel that encapsulates his lifelong exploration of faith, doubt, and redemption. This work remains one of the most profound meditations on the nature of God, human suffering, and moral responsibility. Even in his last moments, Dostoevsky was deeply engaged with the themes that had defined his life's work, leaving behind a literary legacy that continues to inspire scholars, writers, and philosophers. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky was born on November 11, 1821, in Moscow, Russia, into a family that profoundly shaped his intellectual and emotional development. His father, Mikhail Andreevich Dostoevsky, was a military doctor with strict and authoritarian tendencies, while his mother, Maria Fedorovna, was known for her gentle and compassionate nature. This contrast between a domineering father and a loving mother would later be reflected in many of Dostoevsky's literary characters, particularly in their struggles with authority, morality, and emotional turmoil. The influence of his early family life left a lasting mark on his personal philosophy and writing style. Growing up in a devout Orthodox Christian household, Dostoevsky was introduced to religious teachings at an early age. His mother, in particular, played a key role in nurturing his faith, often reading the Bible to him and his siblings. This early exposure to Christian teachings instilled in him a lifelong preoccupation with questions of sin, redemption, and divine justice. Many of his later works, including Crime and Punishment and The Brothers Karamazov, grapple with these themes, reflecting the spiritual conflicts that Dostoevsky himself experienced throughout his life. Dostoevsky's education began at home, where he developed a love for literature. His father encouraged him to read widely, introducing him to classical works of Russian and European literature. Among his early literary influences were Nikolai Karamzin, Alexander Pushkin, and Friedrich Schiller, all of whom contributed to shaping his understanding of storytelling, human psychology, and moral dilemmas. As a child, Dostoevsky showed a strong inclination toward literature and would often immerse himself in books, demonstrating an early talent for storytelling. In 1837, when Dostoevsky was only 15 years old, his mother passed away from tuberculosis. This was a devastating loss for the young Fyodor, who had been deeply attached to her. Shortly after her death, his father sent him and his older brother, Mikhail, to the St. Petersburg Military Engineering Institute. This decision was motivated by practical concerns, as a military career was considered stable and respectable. However, Dostoevsky had little interest in engineering or military affairs. His true passion remained literature, and during his time at the Institute, he spent much of his free time reading and studying great literary works rather than focusing on his official coursework. Dostoevsky's time at the Institute coincided with another major tragedy in his life, the mysterious death of his father in 1839. Mikhail Dostoevsky reportedly died at the hands of his own serfs, who, according to some accounts, killed him in an act of revenge for his cruel treatment. While the exact circumstances of his death remain uncertain, this event had a profound psychological impact on young Dostoevsky. Scholars have speculated that feelings of guilt and unresolved trauma over his father's death influenced the themes of patricide and moral responsibility in his later works, particularly in The Brothers Karamazov. Despite his obligations at the Military Institute, Dostoevsky's passion for literature only grew stronger. He became deeply interested in the works of romantic and philosophical writers, particularly Victor Hugo, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and Charles Dickens. He was also influenced by the philosophical ideas of Hegel and Rousseau, whose works challenged his understanding of human nature, free will, and societal structures. This intellectual environment helped him develop his own literary vision, one that blended psychological depth with philosophical inquiry. After graduating from a military institute in 1843, Dostoevsky briefly worked as an engineer but quickly abandoned this career to pursue his true calling, writing. His first major literary success came in 1846 with the publication of Poor Folk, a novel that was widely praised by critics and established him as a promising new voice in Russian literature. The novel's sympathetic portrayal of poverty and suffering resonated with readers and demonstrated Dostoevsky's ability to capture the emotional and social struggles of ordinary people. It was during this time that he became associated with the literary circles of St. Petersburg, including the influential critic Vissarion-Belinsky, who praised his work for its realism and humanitarian themes. Dostoevsky's early literary career, however, was not without its challenges. Despite the success of Poor Folk, his subsequent works received mixed reviews, and he struggled to maintain his reputation as a leading literary figure. His second novel, The Double, which delved into themes of psychological fragmentation and identity, was not well received by critics, who found it overly complex and difficult to understand. This early setback did not deter Dostoevsky, but it did foreshadow the struggles he would face in gaining widespread recognition for his unique literary style. His early years also marked the beginning of his engagement with radical political ideas, particularly those associated with the intellectual movements of the time. Inspired by utopian socialism and the writings of French thinkers such as Charles Fourier and Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Dostoevsky became involved in a group of young intellectuals who discussed revolutionary ideas. While he was never a committed revolutionary, his association with these circles would have serious consequences, leading to his arrest and eventual exile. The early years of Fyodor Dostoevsky's literary career were marked by both triumph and struggle. From the moment he abandoned his engineering career to pursue writing, he demonstrated an unwavering commitment to exploring the complexities of human nature through literature. His debut novel, Poor Folk, 1846, was met with widespread critical acclaim, earning him recognition among the leading intellectuals of St. Petersburg. However, his early success was followed by a period of uncertainty, as he struggled to maintain his literary reputation and find his unique voice in the Russian literary scene. Dostoevsky's literary debut was greatly influenced by the social realism of the time. Poor Folk is an epistolary novel that tells the story of two impoverished individuals, Makar Dvushkin and Varvara Dobrosolova, who exchange letters detailing their daily struggles and hardships. The novel's themes of poverty, social injustice, and human dignity resonated deeply with readers and critics alike. Vissarion-Belinsky, the influential literary critic and leader of the Russian radical intelligentsia, hailed Dostoevsky as the new voice of Russian literature, comparing him to Nikolai Gogol. Belinsky saw in Dostoevsky a champion of social justice, someone who could depict the suffering of the lower classes with sensitivity and realism. Encouraged by the success of Poor Folk, Dostoevsky immediately began work on his next novel, The Double, 1846. However, this second work proved to be a turning point in his career, highlighting the stark difference between his artistic ambitions and the expectations of critics and readers. Unlike Poor Folk, which adhered to the conventions of social realism, The Double explored psychological fragmentation and existential anxiety. The novel tells the story of Yakov Petrovich Galiadkin, a minor government official who encounters a doppelganger, a figure identical to himself who gradually takes over his life. The novel's experimental style, surreal atmosphere, and deep psychological themes were met with confusion and rejection. Many critics, including Belinsky, found The Double overly complex and impenetrable, leading to a sharp decline in Dostoevsky's literary standing. The failure of The Double was a major setback for Dostoevsky. The young writer, once celebrated as a literary prodigy, suddenly found himself alienated from the literary elite. Belinsky, who had once praised him, distanced himself from Dostoevsky, accusing him of abandoning social concerns in favor of obscure and irrational themes. This period of rejection and self-doubt had a profound impact on Dostoevsky, reinforcing his sense of isolation and intensifying his lifelong struggle with self-worth and recognition. Despite these setbacks, Dostoevsky continued to experiment with his writing. Throughout the late 1840s, he published several short stories and novellas, including White Nights, 1848, and Natashka Nezvanova, 1849. White Nights, a melancholic tale of unfulfilled love and loneliness, demonstrated Dostoevsky's growing interest in the inner lives of his characters, a theme that would later define his major novels. Meanwhile, Natashka Nezvanova, an unfinished novel, explored themes of childhood trauma and the psychological effects of abusive relationships. These works, though not widely celebrated at the time, provided crucial insights into the themes and narrative techniques that Dostoevsky would later refine. During this period, Dostoevsky also became increasingly involved in radical political circles, a decision that would have grave consequences for his life and career. In the late 1840s, Russia was undergoing a period of intellectual ferment, with many young writers and thinkers embracing socialist and utopian ideas. Dostoevsky, though never a committed revolutionary, was drawn to discussions about social reform and justice. He became associated with the Petrushevsky Circle, a group of intellectuals who gathered to discuss political philosophy and critique the authoritarian policies of Tsar Nicholas I. Although the group was primarily focused on theoretical debates rather than direct action, the Russian authorities viewed it as a subversive threat. In April 1849, Dostoevsky was arrested along with other members of the Petrushevsky Circle and imprisoned in the Peter and Paul Fortress in St. Petersburg. The charges against him were serious. He was accused of conspiring against the government and spreading banned literature. For months, he endured harsh interrogations, uncertain of his fate. Then, in December 1849, he and his fellow prisoners were subjected to a terrifying ordeal. They were taken to a public square and informed that they were to be executed by firing squad. At the last moment, just as the soldiers were preparing to fire, a messenger arrived with a supposed pardon from the Tsar. In reality, the execution had been staged as a psychological punishment, but for Dostoevsky and the others, it was a harrowing experience that left deep psychological scars. Following this ordeal, Dostoevsky was sentenced to 4 years of hard labor in a Siberian prison camp, followed by military service. This period of exile would become one of the most defining experiences of his life, shaping his worldview and artistic vision in profound ways. The suffering he witnessed among prisoners, his reflections on crime and redemption, and his deepening engagement with questions of faith and morality would later emerge as central themes in his greatest works. Dostoevsky's early literary career was thus a period of both promise and disillusionment. While Poor Folk had initially positioned him as a rising star, his subsequent struggles with critical rejection, financial hardship, and political persecution nearly destroyed his career. However, these challenges also forced him to confront deeper philosophical and existential questions that would later define his masterpieces. His imprisonment and exile, rather than silencing him, ultimately transformed him into one of the most profound and original thinkers in literary history. Few experiences shaped Fyodor Dostoevsky's life and work as profoundly as his years of imprisonment and exile in Siberia. Arrested in 1849 for his association with the Petrushevsky Circle, a group of intellectuals discussing radical political ideas, Dostoevsky was accused of engaging in anti-government activities and spreading banned literature. Though he was not a revolutionary in the strict sense, his involvement in these discussions was enough to earn him a death sentence, an event that would alter his perception of life, faith, and human suffering in ways that deeply influenced his later novels. On December 22, 1849, Dostoevsky and his fellow prisoners were led to a public square in St. Petersburg for what they believed would be their execution. Blindfolded and lined up before a firing squad, they awaited their fate, only to be pardoned at the last moment by an order from Tsar Nicholas I. This was a carefully orchestrated psychological torment designed to instill terror and obedience. The experience left an indelible mark on Dostoevsky. He later described the excruciating moments before the supposed execution as a time of intense reflection on life, mortality, and redemption. This harrowing ordeal found its way into The Idiot, where Prince Mishkin recounts a similarly traumatic near execution. Following this ordeal, Dostoevsky was sentenced to 4 years of hard labor in the Omsk prison camp, followed by compulsory military service. His time in the labor camp was characterized by extreme hardship, both physically and emotionally. Conditions in the camp were appalling. Prisoners were crammed into overcrowded barracks, subjected to brutal treatment, and forced to perform grueling labor in harsh Siberian winters. He later wrote that the suffering he endured there stripped him of all previous illusions about human nature and society. Dostoevsky's experience in the prison camp was unique in that he, a member of the Russian intelligentsia, found himself living among criminals from various backgrounds, including thieves, murderers, and political dissidents. This exposure to a broad spectrum of humanity profoundly altered his perspective on crime and punishment, justice and redemption. He no longer viewed criminals as simply evil or irredeemable, but began to understand the complexity of human nature, the desperate circumstances that led people to commit crimes, and the potential for moral transformation. These themes would later be explored in Crime and Punishment and The Brothers Karamazov. Religious faith became a crucial part of Dostoevsky's survival in prison. While he had been raised in a devout Orthodox Christian household, his youthful engagement with socialist and utopian ideas had distanced him from religious belief. However, in the depths of Siberian exile, he rediscovered his faith. The suffering he endured, combined with the influence of deeply religious fellow prisoners, led him to embrace a more personal and spiritual understanding of Christianity. This renewed faith played a central role in his later works, where characters wrestle with questions of salvation, grace, and divine justice. Dostoevsky's reflections on his time in prison were later recorded in The House of the Dead, 1861, a semi-autobiographical novel that provides a detailed and deeply humane portrayal of life in a Siberian labor camp. Unlike previous portrayals of prisoners as mere criminals, Dostoevsky depicted them as complex individuals shaped by circumstance, capable of both cruelty and kindness. The novel is a meditation on suffering, resilience, and the possibility of redemption, themes that would recur throughout his literary career. In addition to the physical hardships of prison life, Dostoevsky suffered from severe epilepsy, which worsened during his time in exile. His seizures, often accompanied by intense psychological distress, contributed to his evolving views on human consciousness and the boundaries between sanity and madness. Many of his characters, including Prince Mishkin in The Idiot and Smerdyakov in The Brothers Karamazov, experience epileptic episodes, reflecting Dostoevsky's own struggles with the condition. His firsthand experience of altered states of consciousness gave his writing an extraordinary depth in its exploration of psychological suffering and existential uncertainty. After completing his prison sentence in 1854, Dostoevsky was sent to serve in the Russian military in a remote Siberian outpost. Although his situation improved somewhat, he remained under government surveillance and was not allowed to publish freely. However, during this period, he continued to refine his literary ideas and deepened his philosophical convictions. He also fell in love with Maria Dmitrievna Isaeva, the widow of a fellow exile, whom he married in 1857. Their marriage was troubled, marked by emotional distance and financial difficulties, but it played a significant role in his post-exile years. Despite the challenges of exile, Dostoevsky emerged from Siberia with a renewed sense of purpose. He had been transformed from a young, somewhat idealistic writer into a man who had stared into the depths of human suffering and survived. His faith, his understanding of human nature, and his approach to literature had all been profoundly reshaped. No longer merely interested in social commentary, he now sought to explore the most fundamental questions of human existence: faith and doubt, sin and redemption, freedom and responsibility. Emerging from years of imprisonment and exile in 1859, Fyodor Dostoevsky faced the daunting task of reintegrating into Russian literary society. His exile had distanced him from the intellectual circles of St. Petersburg, and he returned to a literary landscape that had evolved significantly during his absence. The radical socialist movements that had been gaining momentum before his arrest had grown even stronger, while new literary figures had risen to prominence. Dostoevsky, once a celebrated young writer, now had to rebuild his reputation from the ground up. His return to literary life was not only a professional challenge, but also a deeply personal journey of intellectual and artistic transformation. One of the most immediate obstacles Dostoevsky faced was government surveillance. Having been branded a political criminal, he remained under strict observation by the authorities. His ability to publish was limited, and he had to exercise caution in his writings. Nevertheless, he was determined to reclaim his place in Russian literature. Unlike before his exile, when he had been loosely associated with socialist ideals, Dostoevsky now returned with a more conservative and religious outlook, shaped by his experiences in Siberia. His new worldview set him apart from many of the dominant intellectual movements of the time, particularly the materialist and atheist philosophies espoused by the radical intelligentsia. In the early years following his return, Dostoevsky focused on publishing works that reflected his prison experiences and evolving philosophical outlook. His first major post-exile novel, The House of the Dead, 1861, was based on his time in the Siberian labor camp. The novel was groundbreaking in its depiction of prisoners as complex individuals rather than mere criminals. It portrayed their suffering, resilience, and capacity for redemption, themes that would remain central to Dostoevsky's later works. The House of the Dead was well received by critics and readers alike, marking the beginning of his literary revival. At the same time, Dostoevsky became involved in journalism, co-founding the magazine Vremya, Time, in 1861 with his brother Mikhail. Vremya provided a platform for Dostoevsky to engage with contemporary political and social debates, and it was in this journal that he first articulated his idea of the Russian soul, a concept that emphasized the unique spiritual and moral character of the Russian people. He advocated for a vision of Russia that rejected both Western liberalism and radical socialism, instead embracing Orthodox Christianity and national unity. These ideas would later be explored in his greatest novels. Despite initial success, Dostoevsky's journalistic ventures were fraught with challenges. Vremya was banned in 1863 due to an article deemed politically subversive by the authorities. Undeterred, Dostoevsky and his brother launched a new publication, Epoch, but financial struggles and limited readership led to its failure in 1865. These difficulties, combined with mounting personal debts, pushed Dostoevsky into a period of intense financial instability, a burden that would plague him for much of his life. During this period, Dostoevsky also faced profound personal hardships. His first wife, Maria Dmitrievna Isaeva, whom he had married while in exile, suffered from chronic illness and passed away in 1864. Their marriage had been troubled, marked by emotional distance and misunderstandings, but her death nevertheless left him devastated. That same year, his beloved brother Mikhail also died, further deepening his emotional and financial distress. These losses marked a turning point in Dostoevsky's life, plunging him into a period of grief, self-reflection, and creative reinvention. It was during this time of crisis that Dostoevsky conceived one of his most famous works, Crime and Punishment, 1866. The novel, which explores themes of guilt, redemption, and moral responsibility, was deeply influenced by his own experiences with suffering and spiritual awakening. The protagonist, Raskolnikov, is a young intellectual who commits murder, believing he has the right to do so for a higher purpose. However, he is ultimately consumed by guilt and forced to confront his own humanity. Through Raskolnikov's psychological torment and eventual redemption, Dostoevsky dramatized the moral and philosophical dilemmas he himself had grappled with throughout his life. The writing of Crime and Punishment was an arduous process, made even more difficult by Dostoevsky's financial troubles. To pay off his debts, he entered into an exploitative contract with a publisher that required him to deliver a new novel within an impossibly short deadline. Fearing financial ruin, he took a drastic step. He hired a stenographer, Anna Snitkina, to help him complete the novel on time. Anna not only assisted him professionally, but also became his second wife in 1867. Their marriage proved to be a source of stability and happiness for Dostoevsky, providing him with the emotional support he had long lacked. Dostoevsky's return to literature was thus a journey marked by both hardship and renewal. He had re-entered a literary world that had changed drastically during his years in exile, yet he managed to re-establish himself as one of Russia's leading novelists. His experiences of suffering and redemption became the foundation of his greatest works, allowing him to explore the depths of human psychology with unparalleled insight. In the late 1860s, Fyodor Dostoevsky embarked on a series of travels across Europe, a period that was marked by both creative inspiration and intense personal turmoil. These journeys, undertaken primarily to escape creditors in Russia and to find an environment conducive to writing, became a turning point in his life. However, rather than providing relief, his time abroad exacerbated his financial troubles due to his obsessive gambling habit, which led to repeated cycles of desperation, loss, and renewed determination to overcome his weaknesses. The experiences of this period deeply influenced his literary work, particularly The Gambler, 1867, and the later psychological complexities found in The Idiot, 1869, and Demons, 1872. Dostoevsky's travels in Europe began in 1867, shortly after his marriage to Anna Snitkina. Fleeing from mounting debts and the demands of creditors, the couple left Russia and spent several years moving between Germany, Switzerland, Italy, and France. While Dostoevsky had once admired the intellectual and cultural achievements of Europe, he quickly became disillusioned. He found Western societies to be overly materialistic, individualistic, and spiritually hollow, an observation that reinforced his belief in the unique moral and spiritual depth of Russian culture. His disillusionment with the West would later be expressed in his novels, particularly in Demons and The Brothers Karamazov, where he contrasted European rationalism with Russian spiritual depth. While in Europe, Dostoevsky's financial situation remained dire. His contracts with Russian publishers required him to produce novels on strict deadlines, but his erratic behavior, worsened by stress and health issues, often delayed his progress. His most pressing financial problem, however, was his compulsive gambling. Dostoevsky became obsessed with roulette, particularly in the German gambling resorts of Baden-Baden, Wiesbaden, and Hamburg. He convinced himself that he could develop a strategy to beat the system, but time and again, he lost significant sums of money, leaving himself and Anna in desperate circumstances. Gambling was not merely a financial problem for Dostoevsky. It was a psychological compulsion that reflected his deeper struggles with fate, risk, and self-destruction. He described the emotional highs and lows of gambling with remarkable insight in The Gambler, 1867, a novel he wrote under extreme pressure to fulfill a contract and avoid financial ruin. The protagonist, Alexei Ivanovich, is a man caught in the grip of gambling addiction, unable to resist the seductive thrill of risk and loss. The novel is not just a critique of gambling, but an exploration of human obsession, self-destructive behavior, and the illusions of control, themes that resonated deeply with Dostoevsky's own life. Anna Snitkina played a crucial role in helping Dostoevsky survive this period. Unlike his first wife, Maria, who had been emotionally distant and often critical, Anna was deeply devoted to him. She tolerated his flaws, managed their finances as best as she could, and provided the stability he desperately needed. Despite the constant financial strain and the humiliations they suffered at the hands of creditors, she remained supportive and encouraged him to focus on his writing. Her influence helped Dostoevsky regain a sense of discipline and responsibility, which proved crucial in his later years. Despite the hardships, Dostoevsky's European exile was also a period of creative growth. During these years, he completed The Idiot, 1869, one of his most profound explorations of human goodness and moral suffering. The novel's protagonist, Prince Mishkin, embodies a Christ-like innocence and compassion, yet he is ultimately unable to function in a world dominated by cruelty, manipulation, and materialism. Many scholars believe that Mishkin's struggles reflect Dostoevsky's own feelings of alienation in Europe, where he saw a society increasingly driven by self-interest and lacking in spiritual depth. As his debts mounted and his frustration with Western society deepened, Dostoevsky longed to return to Russia. He saw his homeland not only as his literary and spiritual home, but also as the only place where he could find true redemption and meaning. This longing was expressed in his growing nationalism and in his opposition to Western liberalism, which he saw as a dangerous force that could erode Russia's traditional values. These ideas would become central themes in his later works, particularly in Demons, 1872, which explored the dangers of radical ideologies and political extremism. By 1871, Dostoevsky's situation had begun to stabilize, thanks largely to Anna's financial management and his increased discipline in writing. He finally abandoned gambling, realizing the destruction it had caused in his life. With renewed focus, he turned his attention to larger philosophical and political questions, preparing to write the novels that would define his legacy. The European exile, though filled with suffering, had forced him to confront his deepest fears and weaknesses, ultimately strengthening his resolve as both a writer and a man. Dostoevsky's return to Russia in 1871 marked the beginning of his final and most productive years. Though he was still burdened by financial difficulties, he had matured as a writer and thinker, ready to tackle the grand themes of faith, free will, and the nature of evil. The experiences of his travels, his encounters with Western culture, his struggles with gambling, and his deepening religious convictions had given him the material and insight needed to produce his greatest works. Upon returning to Russia in 1871, Fyodor Dostoevsky entered the most prolific and influential phase of his literary career. He had endured exile, personal tragedies, financial struggles, and his own destructive gambling addiction, but he emerged from these trials with a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next decade, he would produce his most complex and philosophically profound novels, works that continue to be regarded as some of the greatest achievements in world literature. His focus turned to exploring the deepest questions of human existence: faith, morality, free will, and the nature of good and evil. It was during this period that he wrote Demons, 1872, The Adolescent, 1875, and his final masterpiece, The Brothers Karamazov, 1880. One of the defining characteristics of Dostoevsky's later work was its engagement with the political and ideological struggles of Russia in the late 19th century. Demons, also known as The Possessed or The Devils, was a scathing critique of radical political movements, particularly nihilism and revolutionary socialism, which were gaining momentum in Russia at the time. The novel was inspired by a real-life case: the murder of a radical student by his fellow revolutionaries, an event that deeply troubled Dostoevsky. He saw in these radicals a dangerous rejection of traditional Russian values and a willingness to embrace violence in pursuit of utopian ideals. Demons depicts the moral and psychological collapse of a group of revolutionaries, exposing the emptiness and destructiveness of their ideology. Unlike his earlier novels, which focused on individual psychological struggles, Demons took a broader societal approach, addressing the dangers of extremist ideologies. The novel was controversial upon publication, as it openly criticized the revolutionary movements that many intellectuals supported. However, it was also prophetic. Many of the themes Dostoevsky explored, including the manipulation of youth, the corruption of ideals, and the consequences of political fanaticism, would later play out in Russian history during the revolutions of the early 20th century. The novel's central message was clear. In rejecting faith and traditional morality, society risked descending into chaos and destruction. Following the success of Demons, Dostoevsky turned his attention to The Adolescent, 1875, a novel that is often seen as a bridge between his earlier psychological explorations and his final masterpiece. The novel follows the struggles of a young man, Arkady Dolgoruki, as he seeks to define himself in a world full of corruption, deception, and conflicting ideologies. Though not as well known as his other works, The Adolescent is a crucial piece in Dostoevsky's literary evolution, as it explores the generational tensions between old Russian values and the new radical movements. Despite his growing literary success, Dostoevsky continued to struggle with financial difficulties and deteriorating health. However, he had finally found personal stability in his marriage to Anna Snitkina, who played an essential role in managing his affairs and ensuring that he could focus on writing. Their relationship was marked by deep affection and mutual support, a stark contrast to the instability of his earlier years. Anna also took charge of publishing his works, helping him achieve financial independence for the first time in his career. By the late 1870s, Dostoevsky had become one of the most respected literary figures in Russia. His public readings attracted large audiences, and his influence extended beyond literature into philosophy and politics. He was invited to speak at the dedication of the Pushkin Memorial in 1880, where he delivered a speech that was met with widespread acclaim. In it, he emphasized the unique spiritual mission of Russia and the idea that Russian literature, led by figures like Pushkin, could unite people across social and political divisions. This speech cemented his reputation as a national thinker, not just a novelist. It was during this final phase of his life that Dostoevsky wrote The Brothers Karamazov, 1880, widely considered his greatest work. This novel encapsulated all the themes that had defined his career: the struggle between faith and doubt, the complexity of human psychology, the question of free will, and the search for redemption. The novel tells the story of the Karamazov brothers, each representing different aspects of human nature and their involvement in the murder of their father. Through these characters, Dostoevsky explored the fundamental philosophical and moral dilemmas of human existence. One of the most famous sections of The Brothers Karamazov is The Grand Inquisitor, a chapter in which one of the characters, Ivan Karamazov, presents a vision of a world where organized religion controls people's lives by taking away their freedom. This passage is one of the most powerful critiques of institutional religion ever written, yet it is presented alongside an equally compelling argument for faith and redemption. The novel does not provide easy answers, but instead forces readers to grapple with these questions for themselves. As The Brothers Karamazov was being published, Dostoevsky's health was rapidly declining. Years of stress, financial hardship, and chronic illness had taken their toll. However, he remained committed to his work until the very end. He had planned a sequel to The Brothers Karamazov, in which he intended to further explore the spiritual journey of the novel's protagonist, Alyosha, but he would never have the chance to complete it. In early 1881, Dostoevsky suffered a severe lung hemorrhage and died shortly thereafter at the age of 59. His death was a profound loss to Russian literature and philosophy, but his legacy endured. His funeral was attended by thousands of admirers, a testament to the deep impact he had on Russian culture and thought. His works would go on to influence not only literature, but also psychology, philosophy, and political theory, inspiring thinkers such as Friedrich Nietzsche, Sigmund Freud, and Jean-Paul Sartre. After Fyodor Dostoevsky's death in 1881, his literary and philosophical influence only grew stronger. While he was recognized as a significant writer during his lifetime, it was in the decades that followed that his works reached their full cultural and intellectual impact. Dostoevsky's novels, rich with psychological depth, moral dilemmas, and existential questions, became foundational texts in the fields of literature, philosophy, and even psychology. His posthumous legacy would extend far beyond Russia, inspiring some of the greatest thinkers, writers, and political figures of the 20th and 21st centuries. One of the most immediate and profound aspects of Dostoevsky's legacy was his influence on Russian literature. Writers such as Leo Tolstoy, Anton Chekhov, and Maxim Gorky all acknowledged his significance, though Tolstoy was known to have mixed feelings about Dostoevsky's style and ideas. Chekhov, in particular, admired Dostoevsky's ability to capture the depth of human suffering, while Gorky viewed him as a revolutionary force in literature. The psychological intensity and philosophical depth of Dostoevsky's work would shape Russian literary tradition for generations, influencing both the symbolists of the early 20th century and the Soviet writers who followed. Beyond literature, Dostoevsky's ideas found fertile ground in the emerging field of psychology. Sigmund Freud famously regarded The Brothers Karamazov as one of the greatest novels ever written and analyzed the character of Ivan Karamazov in relation to the Oedipus complex. Freud saw Dostoevsky's own struggles with his father, guilt, and morality as central to his creative genius. Carl Jung, too, found inspiration in Dostoevsky's exploration of human nature, particularly his depiction of the unconscious mind and the duality of good and evil within individuals. Perhaps even more significant was Dostoevsky's impact on existentialist philosophy. His works deeply influenced thinkers such as Friedrich Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus. Nietzsche, who declared that God is dead, was both fascinated and disturbed by Dostoevsky's exploration of morality in a world without absolute religious authority. He saw Dostoevsky as one of the few writers who truly understood the consequences of nihilism, the rejection of traditional values, and the search for meaning in an indifferent universe. Sartre and Camus, key figures in 20th century existentialism, drew upon Dostoevsky's ideas in their own works, particularly in their explorations of freedom, responsibility, and the absurdity of life. Dostoevsky's political and ideological impact was also profound. His critique of revolutionary movements in Demons foreshadowed the rise of totalitarian ideologies in the 20th century. Many later scholars, including Alexander Solzhenitsyn, saw Dostoevsky as a prophetic figure who warned of the dangers of political extremism and the dehumanization that could result from utopian ideologies. His skepticism of Western liberalism and socialism resonated with conservative thinkers, while his deep concern for human suffering and justice appealed to those on the left. His ability to explore conflicting ideological perspectives without providing easy answers made him a writer who could be claimed by thinkers across the political spectrum. In Russia, Dostoevsky's legacy was complicated by the political transformations of the 20th century. Under Soviet rule, his works were both celebrated and censored. On one hand, his depictions of poverty, injustice, and the struggles of the common people were seen as aligning with socialist ideals. On the other hand, his religious conservatism, criticism of revolutionaries, and focus on individual moral responsibility clashed with communist ideology. For a time, his works were suppressed or selectively interpreted to fit Soviet narratives. However, by the mid-20th century, Dostoevsky was fully reinstated in the Soviet literary canon, recognized as one of Russia's greatest writers. Outside Russia, Dostoevsky's influence continued to grow. His novels were widely translated, and their themes resonated with readers around the world. In the United States and Western Europe, his works were embraced by intellectuals grappling with the moral crises of the 20th century: war, totalitarianism, and the decline of religious faith. During the Cold War, Dostoevsky was often cited as a writer who understood the psychological and ideological struggles between the East and West, between totalitarianism and individual freedom. Dostoevsky's works also had a significant impact on modern literature. Writers such as Franz Kafka, James Joyce, and Virginia Woolf admired his narrative techniques and deep psychological insight. Kafka, in particular, was influenced by Dostoevsky's themes of guilt, existential dread, and bureaucratic absurdity, as seen in The Trial and The Metamorphosis. In more recent decades, novelists like J.M. Coetzee and Haruki Murakami have drawn upon Dostoevsky's themes of alienation and moral ambiguity in their own works. In the 21st century, Dostoevsky's relevance has not diminished. His explorations of human psychology, morality, and ideological conflict remain strikingly modern. The ethical dilemmas he posed about justice, faith, power, and free will continue to be debated in academic, literary, and philosophical circles. His work has also found new life in film, theater, and digital media, with adaptations and reinterpretations bringing his ideas to new audiences. Ultimately, Dostoevsky's posthumous legacy is one of enduring relevance. He was not merely a novelist, but a thinker whose insights into the human condition have stood the test of time. His ability to confront the darkest aspects of human nature while still affirming the possibility of redemption makes him a writer who continues to challenge and inspire readers across cultures and generations. As the world continues to grapple with moral and philosophical dilemmas, Dostoevsky's voice remains as vital as ever. More than a century after his death, Fyodor Dostoevsky's works continue to be studied, adapted, and debated in academic, literary, and philosophical circles. His novels, rich with existential inquiry, psychological depth, and moral complexity, remain as relevant today as they were in 19th century Russia. In an era marked by ideological conflicts, technological advancements, and the search for meaning in an increasingly secular world, Dostoevsky's explorations of faith, free will, and human suffering continue to resonate deeply. His presence in modern discourse is not only a testament to his literary genius, but also to the timeless nature of his themes. One of the most striking aspects of Dostoevsky's continued relevance is his impact on contemporary literature. Many modern writers, particularly those who grapple with themes of alienation, moral ambiguity, and existential crisis, find inspiration in his works. Authors such as J.M. Coetzee, Haruki Murakami, and David Foster Wallace have drawn upon Dostoevskyan themes in their own novels, incorporating elements of psychological complexity and philosophical reflection. His influence extends beyond literature into cinema, where directors such as Ingmar Bergman, Andrei Tarkovsky, and Christopher Nolan have explored themes reminiscent of Dostoevsky's: guilt, redemption, and the search for truth. Beyond literature and film, Dostoevsky's ideas continue to be relevant in philosophical and political debates. His critiques of nihilism and radical ideology, most notably in Demons and the Brothers Karamazov, remain strikingly prescient in the context of modern extremism and ideological fanaticism. The rise of authoritarian movements, political polarization, and debates over the role of religion in public life all reflect tensions Dostoevsky explored in his novels. His warnings about the dangers of utopian thinking, the loss of personal responsibility, and the consequences of rejecting moral absolutes continue to inform discussions in political science and ethics. Dostoevsky's works are also frequently revisited in psychological and neuroscientific studies. His deep understanding of human consciousness, internal conflict, and irrational behavior has led many scholars to regard him as a precursor to modern psychology. His characters, whether it be Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, Ivan Karamazov in The Brothers Karamazov, or the Underground Man in Notes from Underground, demonstrate behaviors and thought processes that align with contemporary understandings of trauma, guilt, and mental illness. Some researchers have even examined Dostoevsky's own experiences with epilepsy, which he depicted in the character of Prince Mishkin in The Idiot, in relation to modern neurological studies. Furthermore, Dostoevsky's exploration of the human condition continues to be a subject of study in academic institutions worldwide. His novels are a staple of literature and philosophy courses, particularly those focused on existentialism, ethics, and political thought. Scholars continue to produce new interpretations of his work, uncovering previously overlooked aspects of his narrative techniques, thematic structures, and philosophical implications. His presence in academia is not limited to literature departments. His works are also examined in fields such as theology, law, and criminology. In addition to academic analysis, Dostoevsky's novels have been widely adapted into modern media. Theater productions, films, and television series have reinterpreted his works for contemporary audiences, often emphasizing their psychological and ethical dilemmas. Recent adaptations have sought to place his themes in modern settings, demonstrating how his insights into human nature transcend time and place. His influence even extends to digital media, where online discussions, podcasts, and YouTube analyses continue to introduce new generations of readers to his work. Dostoevsky's exploration of morality and redemption is particularly relevant in today's world, where debates over justice, forgiveness, and personal responsibility remain central to social and legal discourse. His portrayal of crime and punishment, for example, raises questions about the nature of guilt, the possibility of rehabilitation, and the role of conscience in human decision-making. These themes remain essential in contemporary discussions on criminal justice, mental health, and social reform. In the realm of faith and spirituality, Dostoevsky's work continues to inspire both believers and skeptics. His novels present a profound engagement with religious and existential questions, balancing the despair of characters like Ivan Karamazov with the faith and redemption found in figures such as Alyosha. Many theologians regard Dostoevsky as one of the greatest literary voices on the struggle between doubt and belief, a struggle that remains highly relevant in the modern secular world. His insights into human suffering and redemption continue to be sources of contemplation for both religious and philosophical thinkers. Despite the passage of time, Dostoevsky's novels remain an essential part of global literary culture. His ability to depict the extremes of human emotion, the weight of existential choices, and the moral complexities of life ensures that his work will continue to be read and analyzed for generations to come. His influence extends not only to literature and philosophy, but also to psychology, politics, and ethics, making him one of the most enduring and profound writers in history. The literary legacy of Fyodor Dostoevsky stands as a monumental testament to the depth and complexity of the human condition. While many writers explore the facets of life, Dostoevsky's work transcends the confines of time, geography, and ideological boundaries. His novels, filled with philosophical insight, psychological depth, and moral ambiguity, continue to offer a compelling vision of the struggles inherent in human existence. The enduring significance of Dostoevsky's work lies not only in its literary merits, but also in its profound engagement with questions of faith, freedom, guilt, suffering, and redemption, issues that remain at the heart of the human experience. Dostoevsky's exploration of moral and existential dilemmas is what ensures the lasting relevance of his work. His characters, often grappling with feelings of alienation, guilt, and the search for meaning, reflect the most universal aspects of human psychology. From the tortured Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment to the spiritual journey of Alyosha Karamazov in The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky's characters are imbued with a depth and complexity that reveal the contradictions and nuances of human nature. His ability to delve into the darkness of the human soul, to unearth the deepest questions of existence, and to offer no simple answers, is what makes his works not only timeless, but eternally pertinent. In a world increasingly characterized by technological advances, globalization, and the fragmentation of traditional values, Dostoevsky's exploration of spiritual and existential themes remains strikingly pertinent. His portrayal of the inner turmoil faced by individuals caught between faith and doubt, or between the desires of the self and the demands of society, speaks to contemporary anxieties about personal meaning and societal disintegration. In an age where many people struggle to find purpose, Dostoevsky's works provide a profound examination of the search for truth and the challenges that accompany it. His characters, whether they are atheists, mystics, or radicals, are all united by a shared human quest to understand the deeper dimensions of life. Dostoevsky's exploration of faith, especially the tension between belief and disbelief, is particularly relevant in our secular age. His works offer no simple solutions to the problem of faith, but rather present it as a complex and often painful struggle. Characters like Ivan Karamazov, who doubts the existence of a just God in the face of human suffering, or the underground man, whose existential crisis leads him to reject conventional morality, embody the doubts that many contemporary individuals feel. Yet, Dostoevsky does not offer a facile resolution to these crises. Instead, he challenges readers to confront these difficult questions and come to terms with the complexities of belief, suffering, and grace. Furthermore, Dostoevsky's examination of freedom and responsibility remains one of his most profound contributions to modern thought. His works engage with the paradoxes of free will, how individuals are both agents of their own fate and, at times, trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The tension between individual autonomy and moral responsibility, as well as the consequences of personal choices, is vividly portrayed in works like Crime and Punishment, where Raskolnikov's quest to assert his moral superiority leads him to commit murder, and The Brothers Karamazov, where the question of whether free will can coexist with divine justice is explored. This tension is one that resonates strongly today, as modern society grapples with questions of personal responsibility in the face of social inequality, systemic injustice, and the overwhelming forces of globalization. Dostoevsky's ability to portray the most profound psychological states is another reason for his enduring impact. His exploration of the mind, its torments, contradictions, and internal conflicts, was groundbreaking for his time and continues to influence modern psychology. His characters exhibit a range of mental states, from intense guilt and paranoia to moments of transcendence and clarity, offering a rich and complex picture of the human psyche. The psychological insights in his works foreshadow many of the themes that would later be explored by Freud, Jung, and other psychologists, yet Dostoevsky's analysis of a human mind is not purely scientific. Rather, it is deeply moral and spiritual, reflecting his understanding that the mind cannot be separated from the soul. This blending of psychology with spirituality allows his work to resonate across disciplines, from literature to philosophy to mental health. Dostoevsky's influence on existentialism, with its focus on individual freedom, the absurdity of life, and the search for meaning, cannot be overstated. Writers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus engaged with Dostoevsky's exploration of the human condition and incorporated elements of his thought into their own philosophical inquiries. For Nietzsche, Dostoevsky's exploration of human suffering and the struggle to affirm life in the face of meaninglessness was an essential part of his understanding of the will to power and the creation of values. Sartre and Camus, who grappled with the problem of human existence in a world without inherent meaning, found Dostoevsky's work to be a profound source of intellectual engagement. His exploration of freedom, responsibility, and despair provided a foundation for their own existentialist philosophy, making him a crucial figure in the development of modern existential thought. Politically, Dostoevsky's critiques of radical ideologies, particularly his opposition to nihilism and revolutionary socialism, continue to be relevant in today's ideological climate. His warning about the dangers of political extremism, the dehumanizing effects of radical ideologies, and the potential for violence and chaos in the pursuit of utopian ideals speaks to the contemporary world, where political polarization and ideological fanaticism continue to shape global events. Dostoevsky's works remind us that ideologies, whether left-wing or right-wing, can lead to the destruction of individuality and the erosion of moral responsibility. His insistence on the importance of individual freedom, conscience, and spiritual redemption in the face of ideological tyranny is a powerful call to resist the totalitarian impulses that continue to appear in modern politics. Ultimately, Dostoevsky's greatest achievement is his exploration of the complexities of the human soul. His works do not offer easy answers or simplistic moral judgments. Instead, they invite readers into a world where moral ambiguities abound, where the struggle between good and evil is never resolved, and where the search for meaning is ongoing. In an age that is often defined by its skepticism, materialism, and loss of faith, Dostoevsky's exploration of the spiritual dimensions of life offers a powerful reminder of the human capacity for redemption, love, and transcendence. His works urge us to confront the darkness within ourselves, to question our assumptions, and to seek truth, no matter how difficult or painful that search may be. In conclusion, Fyodor Dostoevsky's legacy is one that continues to influence and inspire across time, place, and discipline. His profound insights into human psychology, morality, faith, and freedom have made him one of the most important and enduring writers in history. As modern society faces new challenges, political, philosophical, and personal, Dostoevsky's works remain a source of wisdom and reflection. His exploration of the human condition, with all its suffering, complexity, and potential for redemption, ensures that his legacy will endure for generations to come.